Hello everyone, I'm Jenna and today I'm talking about one of my very favorite cozy mystery series and one of the first that I started tracking in my reading log, and it is the Amelia Peabody Victorian mystery series by Elizabeth Peters. And everything takes place in Egypt. It's a British family, so sometimes we do see them at home, but most of the time we're seeing them on site in Egypt, usually in the Valley of the Kings. And it's especially interesting because Elizabeth Peters was a real life Egyptologist. I think she taught at the University of Chicago. And so everything in terms of the research that she's done is really accurate and true to some historical fact that we see. And we even see some actual figures from real history occasionally in these books. I forget how many total novels there are in this series, but there's quite a few. You'll be reading for a while. Ms. Peters did not get to finish the final novel before her death. She had it largely outlined and there was a partial manuscript. So she had a friend of hers finish the final novel. It's called The Painted Queen. The first book in the series is Crocodile on the Sandbank. We start out with Amelia Peabody being single. She meets Emerson. They have Ramses. Then they adopt Nefret, and David is sort of their ward also, or their sort of close family friend who's like a son. We have Abdullah, who loses his life saving her. Spoiler alert, we have a master criminal that eventually becomes kind of friends with the family. And there's elements of early feminism. And I love that Emerson loves that about Amelia. I love that there's this sort of snappy dialogue, that there is this appreciation for women in the Victorian era, that there are things that could be contributed on an intellectual level, not just in terms of a homemaking level. I love to see all of the characters grow throughout the series. They really grow up. You know, Ramses starts out not existing, and then by the time we get to the end of the series, he's in about his early to mid 20s with kids of his own. So it is a fun series to get involved in. I didn't actually start in the beginning of the series. I think the first book I read was The Mummy Case, which I believe is the third in the series, and Ramses is very, very young. And fell in love with it, had to go back and read them all as fast as I could. In my reading log, you can see that it was just for a few months, it was just constant Elizabeth Peters novels from this series. There's another series that Ms. Peters writes in particular that has a female protagonist that's a little more modern. I think she's a historian perhaps, but I just could never get excited about that particular series. I don't know what was off, but Elizabeth Peters is absolutely in her element when she's writing about Egypt. And I even have a nonfiction book about Egypt by Elizabeth Peters that was published under her real name originally and then published under her pen name of Elizabeth Peters. So if you're not familiar with this series, it's finished. Ms. Peters is no longer living, and as far as we know, The Painted Queen represents the last of the outlines and partial manuscripts that were left. So there is, you know, it's a closed end. It's not still ongoing. So I love this series. Like I said, I really immersed myself in it. I sort of binge read all of these books, and I find them really delightful, and I'm sure that you will too. Highly recommend 5 champagne flutes out of 5 for the whole series. Enjoy.